So now that we built our first component, before we're going to add more components, I want to explore how we can actually output dynamic content in such a component, so in our JSX code, instead of just outputting static content. To be precise here, in this header component, I want to make sure that here we're not always saying fundamental React concepts, but that instead we sometimes also output crucial React concepts or core React concepts, so that we switch between these three words. And I want to switch between these options randomly. And that will be an important new feature that we add to our code here, because to achieve this goal, we need to output content dynamically. And that's in general something you will need to do a lot in React, and that's why we will learn how to do that in this lecture. Now, for that, attached you find a new app.jsx file, which you can simply use to replace your file with it. And if you do so, you'll see that it basically adds this code here, these 5 lines of code. And therefore, alternatively, you can of course also simply grab those lines of code and paste them into your app.jsx file. Now here in this code, I set up these words which I want to use, and I have a function which we can use to produce a random number. So in the end, a function which we can use to produce a random index, which we can then use to get access to these different possible words on a random basis. Now to do that, we can go to the place where the dynamic value will be needed, and that will be here in this header component function. Here, instead of always outputting fundamental, I want to output such a random word. And therefore, here in this JSX code, we now don't want a hard-coded value like fundamental or core, but instead we want to output a dynamic value. And that can be done in JSX and React by using curly braces. A single pair of curly braces, opening and closing. And when you add curly braces like this in your JSX code, either like this here between element tags or possibly also as a value for an attribute, you tell JSX and React that you want to output a dynamic value. To be precise, you can now add any JavaScript expression of your choice between those curly braces. So any JavaScript expression code you put between those curly braces will be executed, and it will then be the value of that expression, so the result of that calculation here, for example, that will be output on the screen. So if I do add 1 plus 1 between those curly braces here, we therefore see 2 on the screen. That's how this works. And therefore, this curly brace syntax is of course super important, because it is the syntax that does allow us to blend our hard-coded content with dynamic values. Therefore, here we could reach out to React descriptions, so to this array here, which is stored in this React descriptions constant, and then access an element by index, and that index will now be produced with help of that getRandomInt function, which I'm executing here. This function takes one argument, the maximum value I want to produce. So here, in this case, since I have an index with 3 values, my maximum number I want to produce is 2, because the last element has an index of 2. So therefore here I pass 2 as an argument to getRandomInt, and it should be genRandomInt, of course, not getRandomInt, because genRandomInt is the function name. And if you then save this, you should see that you either have fundamental or crucial or also core as a word in front of React concepts here. So now this is regenerated every time you reload the page, since that's the point in time where this header component is created and rendered, and where this header component function is therefore executed by React. And that's therefore also the point in time where this code here is executed. You can, of course, also now pull that code out of your JSX code and store it in a variable or constant, which could be named description, like this, and then just refer to that variable or constant like this. This would keep your JSX code a bit leaner and move that JavaScript expression out of that code, which typically is considered a good practice. Even though the code before also worked, keeping your JSX code lean is typically preferred, and therefore you might want to go for this option where you then only refer to the constant, which stores the result of this expression here. Either way, the code works, and we can now switch between these different words by reloading the page.